know, there are some places in the world that just make the hairs stand up on the back of your neck, and this is one of them. This is the River Test near Romsey in Hampshire, the famous Timsbury Beat. And I'm here to experience one of the most incredible things in fly fishing, which is the evening rise. So what's so special about the evening rise? Well, it's one of those times when lots of things hatch and the fish become very active. Do you know, the other thing about it is I think it just fits in with the way we live our lives. You might have spent the whole day at work and only have the chance to come to the river for a couple of hours in the evening. Luckily for us though, it coincides with one of potentially the most exciting things in fly fishing. Before I get started, I just want to run you through my setup, but it's very, very simple. I've got an 8'4" for a 3-weight rod fitted with a floating 3-weight line. And I've tied up a tapered leader which tapers down from 8 pounds to 3. And on the end of it, I've tied this fella. This is a Granum pattern, a sedge fly. Now, walking around before I set up my rods today, there's an awful lot of Granum flying around and I've seen a few fish rising. So there are chances this evening of catching 1 or 2 of them. Now, I've got a fly box loaded with all sorts of options to cover any eventualities, a lot of sedgy patterns, interesting stuff covered in CDC. So let's have a little go and see how we get on. So essentially what I'm doing this evening is short session fishing. I've only got a couple of hours. I've made my way up to this location. You can see behind me the sun is setting behind these glorious trees. Now, I had a little recce walking up the river before I got the rods out of the car, and that has proved to be extremely worthwhile because I saw a few fish rising, and actually over my right shoulder they're still rising. There are Granum hatching out of the grasses and all over the place, pinging onto the river, and there are several fish just above me looking really confident and really feeding. So I'm going to try and make a few casts. One other thing I was going to show you, just going to put a little bit of mud on my line. That's just to take any flash out of my leader so it doesn't spook the fish. And this is going to be a bit stealthy, so kind of keeping on my knees, crawling up here, making casts to the fish at the tail end of the little pod that's feeding. So if I do manage to hook one, I won't spook all the others in the shoal. That's the plan. It could all go Pete Tong. One of the things that really is a problem this evening is it's ever so windy. You know, there's a really nasty downstream breeze which could affect my presentation. But you know, we're anglers, we have a little go. The rod's quite punchy, I can knock a nice line out, so fingers crossed, let's see if we can get into one of these lovely River Test trout. Quite excited. There are several fish rising here. One at the tail end looks like a smaller fish. There's a fish that keeps coming up just in line with that little bit of stuff on the far bank. There he is again. Some above him as well. Now what I've got to try and do is be tactical here because there's a chance to catch a couple of fish. So I think I'm going to take the gamble of ignoring this one that's level with me to try to target that one there which looks like a big fish. We've seen his tail come out of the water a couple of times. And I'm just going to crawl up to the bank on my knees, take off a bit of line from the reel and see if I can put a fly over his head. That Granum pattern, oh look at that, so many fish out there. That Granum pattern is very effective for this sort of fishing. Now the issue is whether I'll be able to get the cast out there in this wind. It's not easy. The sun's going down and the fish are feeding a little bit more confidently. The beauty of this little 8-foot rod when you're just drop below it, when you're fishing like this on your knees, stealthy, is you haven't got too much rod to carry above you and you can get quite a nice action, quite a fast little cast, get a bit of pace in the line to punch it through the wind. You can probably hear the line going through the rings on my rod. It's a textured line, which is another thing which is helpful in these circumstances when you're looking for just that little bit of distance, just to get you another couple of yards. Lovely flow, isn't it? Just gorgeous, easy pace. and they're ignoring every single cast I put in, but at least I'm not spooking them. This is so exciting. This is why dry fly fishing is such a fantastic thing. It's so visual. You're seeing everything unfold in front of you, the whole story, just in that little 10 feet of river right in front of my eyes. Just wondering if I can fool this fish into taking. Well, I've managed to hook one. Amazingly, my fly was drifting downriver right next to a natural, and this fella came straight up and grabbed the imitation. It fooled him next to a natural. I mean, that's just so fantastic. Oh, slightly bigger fish than I was expecting. Now, I'm using a 3-weight rod here and just £3 tippet, so I don't want to pull too hard, and I'm also not going to stand up to land it because I don't want to spook anything else that's feeding in that little area. But just try and turn the fish's head, get it up to the surface, and he's ours. Fantastic. So here's my prize, a perfect little river test brownie, which is going straight back into the river. So hopefully, now I've released that fish very quietly back into the river, I've still got a chance at 1 or 2 others. While I was unhooking it, I did see a couple of other fish rise in the same sort of pod. You'll probably see that the light levels are changing quite quickly, and actually there's a lot of cloud cover coming in. And what happened earlier on when that happened was it started chucking it down with hail. So we might not have very long to get another chance. And actually those fish have stopped rising. The air temperature's dropped very quickly. And what that means is the fly life that was coming off a few minutes ago has disappeared. And you can probably feel or see or hear the water surface rippling over. And it's not a good sign. There's a big old cloud approaching upwind, which is rather unpleasant. Just putting a couple of little mends flipping my fly line upstream to stop it pulling the fly across the flow, which is really poor in terms of presentation. And a couple of false casts to dry that CDC feather that forms the wing of that granum, and then alight it on the surface once again and drift it down. See, there's a fish just risen above. I'm just going to move up a bit. Just under the tree there was a fish. Maybe. Oh, that's a nice fish too. So approaching these fish from a slightly downstream angle, hoping that we don't spook them, is a really useful tactic. So that means you're casting kind of at 2 o'clock. It's been an interesting last 5 minutes. We've just had another enormous storm, and while I was changing my fly and just changing my tactics a bit, you know, standing there's a rainbow behind me. What a fantastic evening. And there are fish rising. You know, fascinating kind of way to approach your fishing, this dry fly stuff in an evening, because the fish do sometimes just get locked on and caution goes to the wind a little bit. And you can get them into a little bit of a feeding frenzy when they feel safe. The reason for that is very simple. The light levels have dropped. They're no longer very obvious to any predators that might be around. And also, because there are flies hatching, it's their chance to get their evening meal. When it's bright and sunny, your fly choice is really, really important. And I've decided to tie on this thing. This is a little tiny size 16 emerger, which has got an orange butt, just a little trigger point on the back there. hopefully that'll attract the trout to take. Now the reason an emerger can work in these conditions when it's like this lovely sunny warm evening is because the natural insects, as they emerge through the water column to hatch, if it's bright and sunny, their wings dry really quickly, so they're not on the surface for very long, and away they fly. But an emerger often gets trapped in the surface film and will stay there just for that little bit longer, and then the trout have got a chance to see it and eat the fly. Now the light levels are starting to change a little bit as the sun starts to disappear behind the trees, and this really does turn into such a magical time. You know, all the wildlife here that's all around us, it's just a stunning place to be, and the chance to cast a dry fly at rising trout in this environment where you've got all this stuff going on around you, beautiful sight, gorgeous calm evening. All I need to just make it absolutely perfect is one fish that will take my imitation, and then the world will be a better place. Well, it's taken quite a few casts, but as you can see from the healthy bend in my little 3-weight, I've managed to hook a trout. Patiently casting under that tree, a few fly changes, and I'll show you the pattern in a second. It's another emerger, but slightly different to the one I was using earlier on, and I think this is quite a nice fish. I've also made one other change, which was rather than using a standard nylon tippet, I've switched to fluorocarbon just for the last 18 inches of the line. And what was happening, I think, was that the flash from the line on the surface may have been putting the fish off. And there's a trout, gorgeous creature, look at that. It's nailed that emerger pattern, and at last safely in the landing net. So there's the fly that's done the damage this evening. A little tiny size 16 granum emerger pattern tied with 2 CDC's feathers and a little bit of deer hair, and a body which is segmented, made of a quill, and a little bit of glow bright thread underneath it. Just sits under the surface, sits almost like a shuttlecock, with that bottom part poking through the film and the top part keeping it afloat. You know, it's been a fantastic evening, and one of the best bits about it is coming here, finding it's a little bit tricky actually, and then going through the motions of trying to solve the problem. And that's exactly what I've done. 2 fantastic fish, a couple of hours after work. There's probably still 1 or 2 fish rising actually, so I might have 1 or 2 more casts, but that for me is job done.